All right, here we are back from the break to talk about Class 5, inflation. What do we talk about here? Inflation. What is inflation? That's prices go up over time. That's natural. Some inflation is fine. Too much inflation is a problem. All right, I mentioned this earlier when we talked about the chain price index. We also do the consumer price index, which is just the same thing, different variation. You have to do a calculation on the exam. Just have this open, ready to rock and roll with that. We have a base year price of how much this basket of goods cost. The consumer price index is the cost of the market basket in the current year divided by the cost of the market basket in the base year times 100 gives us a consumer price index. As this consumer price index goes higher and higher, and if you're listening for it on the economic news, you're like, oh, consumer price index higher and higher. If that registers with you, fine. If not, you'll just think about how you're going to take the consumer price index as it change over the original, like so this year minus last year divided by the original times 100 gives you annual inflation rate. If I said that fast, don't worry about it. You didn't miss anything. It's all right there. Just flip to it if you need to do the calculation on the file. Nominal income, real income. Nominal income is in name, how much money made. Real income is how much do you make adjusted for inflation. Two types. We'll get to these later. I think we come back to this in the later class. Demand pull inflation, cost push inflation. We'll cover this later, I think, in class 6 when we can look at actual graphs for it. Okay. Oh, aggregate demand. All right, very good. So we've got aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So this is the aggregate demand curve. We think of this in fairly similar terms as just a traditional demand curve, except this is prices of everything. All right, prices of everything in the whole economy. As prices go down, people are going to be like, oh, my dollars mean more, I'm going to buy more. As prices go up, you're like, my dollars don't buy as much, so I'm going to buy less. And we looked at, I think, 3 things that affect this: real balances effect, interest rate effect, net exports effect. And it may seem a little bit funny that we're looking at this in isolation for the aggregate demand curve, but the thing here is that there are some differences when we look at the price level of absolutely everything in the economy versus just one thing. So if the price of one thing goes up, you're like, oh, I'm not going to buy that, but I'm going to buy something else. So what happens if the price of every single thing goes up? Well, you can't buy something else, so you buy less, make do with less, perhaps. So let's look at these 3. Real balances effect, it's just exactly what I described. As the price goes down, you get more real value for your money. You get more stuff. As price goes up, you get less real value for your money, so you buy less. The other was interest rate effect. So as folks are buying, or as prices go up, people have to borrow money to buy more. All right, if the price of a car goes up, you may need to go borrow money to buy that car. And as more and more people borrow more money, what happens to interest rates? More and more people are going to the bank because they want a car loan. What does the bank start charging more for interest? Yeah, the bank starts charging more, and money gets harder to come by. People buy less. And then the third thing, a net exports effect. So this is just within our economy. So there is a substitute, per se. So if the price in our economy for everything is going up, that doesn't mean the price in the Mexican economy is going up. So we might, as the price in our economy starts going up, we might start buying more in the Mexican economy. So those 3 things, when we look at aggregate demand, everything. Every single thing. All right, and I think in a minute we're going to talk about how we could shift that aggregate demand to make our real GDP more or less. Oops. Yeah, we shifted. All right, we got aggregate supply. Well, I guess before we lose sight of this, there are things we might do to shift aggregate demand. It could be increasing those four components: consumption, investment, government spending, net exports. We might do various things as lawmakers to try to increase consumption, increase investment, better business environment, more government spending, try to get more exports. I don't know, what's Donald Trump going to do to get more exports and less imports? He's probably going to do something. He's going to say we want more exports and less imports so we can shift this to the right. I'll be interested to see what sort of rhetoric he starts using now. All right. Aggregate supply. So this is the red line. This is the supply, what producers are supplying. Remember, a huge component of aggregate supply is labor. So this is labor people are willing to supply at any given price. Okay, and we're going to talk about Keynesian economics, classical economics, and how aggregate supply and demand fit together in a free market. So classical economists say aggregate supply is a straight line up and down. So if demand decreases, we're in recession, people start spending less. And if demand goes down, what happens? Well, the economy corrects itself. So this is full employment supply. We still have the same number of factories, the same number of people who need jobs, but if people are spending less, we have to fight harder for those dollars. So everybody has to get paid a little bit less, everybody has to sell for a little bit less, price goes down, we get back to full employment. All right, we look forward for the day when aggregate demand goes back to this, but for now, at least everybody has a job, we're still in full employment, and the key thing is the economy corrected itself. John Keynes said, nah, it doesn't quite work like that. The economy doesn't correct itself. Because as we're in recession, when people are spending less, the demand curve shifts to the left. Well, prices don't go up, because why would prices go up during the middle of a recession? But prices don't go down because we have minimum wage and we have union labor contracts. So these workers are saying, no, we won't work for less, we won't let you charge less. So the economy does not correct itself in the Keynesian view. So John Maynard Keynes says the government must get involved, it must spend more, it must tax less, push the aggregate demand back to full employment. Okay. Yep. So you will hear economists talk about the Keynesian range or the classical range, and no one really knows where which range is. Essentially what they'll do is they'll look at it after the fact and they'll say, oh, the economy corrected itself, we must have been in the classical range. Or they'll say, we needed an extra government push to get the economy going, we must have been in the Keynesian range. That's what they mean. Classical range is here where the economy can correct itself. Keynesian range is where the economy cannot correct itself. It needs government interference. Okay, shifts in aggregate supply. All right, let's look. We're going to talk about supply side. I don't think this section, but soon. What accounts for shifts in aggregate supply? So let's get a clean slide here. All right, so this red line is aggregate supply. So as price level goes up, producers are like, I'm going to supply more. But there gets to be a point where they can only supply so much because this is everyone's working, everyone's, all the factories are filled. What are some things that could push this aggregate supply to the right. All right? Well, they are lower labor costs. All right? We have lower labor costs. We can produce a little bit more. It's cheaper for us, easier for us. We can produce a little bit more. Lower oil prices. That's an input price. If oil is cheaper, we can produce a little bit more. We can shift to the right. Lower taxes, lower regulations. You get off our backs, we'll start producing more. We'll push that aggregate supply curve to the right. And we'll talk about it in a minute. I'll remind you how the supply side economists said that's the best case scenario. Everyone wins. Pushing the supply curve to the right. And then there's this political discussion where folks started saying, well, that really just benefits the really rich people, which is kind of true, but the really rich people said, yeah, but it benefits you too, everyone. So we'll revisit that discussion in a minute, but those are just some ways where you push the aggregate supply to the right. I told you we would revisit cost push and demand pull inflation. So, all right. So, this is the aggregate supply curve here. This is the aggregate demand curve here. This, maybe we're a little bit classical, a little bit intermediate, a little bit Keynesian range. Aggregate demand curve is just downward sloping as we go to the right. So, oil increases. Cost of oil increases, and oil is a key component in everything we produce, suppose. At any particular price, we're going to produce less because more of our resources, more of our money goes to buying that oil before I even start up production. So what happens in that situation, equilibrium, price goes up, inflation, we see a little bit of inflation, and we see a decrease in real GDP. So we see less people working, less people putting out products, and we see inflation going up. All right? We don't like that. And there's a name for it, stagflation, high unemployment, and rapid inflation simultaneously. And when we talk about how the Fed tries to control inflation and unemployment, we see where the Fed chooses between one or the other. The Fed says, well, we've got to stave off inflation, we've got to get the economy going. They say, let's do a balancing act. Here we have this weird situation of both bad things all at once. Stagflation. Demand pull inflation. That means people buying more dollars chasing the same number of goods, the price goes up a little bit. People buy more, boom, price goes up a little bit. Demand pull inflation. Business cycle. All right, bingo, that's class 5. And we just continue expanding in class 6, as I recall. Fiscal policy. All right, so what does the government do to get that aggregate demand up? Or what might the government do to push that aggregate supply to the right so that everybody wins? Well, they'll do that with their use of discretionary fiscal policy. The government can make decisions on what they spend. They'll make those decisions for the best interest of their citizens. They could increase spending to get the economy going. They could decrease taxes, give everybody a little bit more money in their pockets so that they could get the economy going. And we saw that they could do both. They could increase spending and increase taxes. And the issue with that was, all right, I'm going to increase spending, that's going to get the economy going, and I'm going to increase taxes to pay for that spending. But it's going to hurt a little bit less when you take those taxes because of this multiplier thing that we will revisit shortly. Remember that multiplier thing? All right, well, if you don't, it's fine. We'll revisit the multiplier thing. Spending multiplier. An initial change in spending leads to a chain reaction in which more spending causes a greater change in demand. So this has to do with if we found an extra $100 bill on the streets, how much of that would we spend? How much of that would we save? Well, the more of that $100 we would spend, the bigger this multiplier is, the more chain reaction benefit we get when we give someone an extra $100 to spend or save. Let me go to, I think there's this chart which is going to break it down for us. So I find an extra $100 on the street. What's my propensity to consume? 90%. I'm going to spend 90 of those dollars. I'm going to save 10 of those dollars. My spending multiplier is 1 divided by the marginal propensity to save. 1 divided by 0.1, and so that's going to be 10. So if I'm going to consume 90% of everything extra I make, that's a large spending multiplier of 10. Suppose I'm only going to spend 50% of everything extra that I make. That's going to be 1 divided by 0.5. That's going to be 2. That's okay. All right, it's a nice little spending multiplier effect, but it's not as powerful as the multiplier effect of 10. All right, so spending multiplier effect. Okay, and how this works. So suppose there's a multiplier of 2. So the government spends, I spend an extra $1,000 on services for you all. Andre's going to build a school for me. David's going to do some accounting for me. You're going to take that money, you're going to spend it at Stephanie's restaurant, and 50% of it you're going to keep at each and every step, and then you're going to spend the rest somewhere else. That initial $1,000 is going to be an increase of $2,000 in total spending, because I have a spending multiplier of 2. All right, at this point, I think I want to go straight to the tax multiplier. The tax multiplier has a smaller effect because there's 1 less round of spending. Let me go straight to this table. Okay, take a look at this situation where I'm going to increase spending by $1,000 and I'm going to cut taxes by $1,000. I'm going to do both. I really want to get this economy going. I'm going to cut taxes, let you keep $1,000 of your tax money, and then I'm going to spend $1,000 of government money. Used to be your tax money, but now it's government money to get this economy going. For the government spending, I'm going to spend that $1,000. Whoever I spend it on is going to save half of it and spend $500 of it, and all the way down to increased spending by $2,000. All right, but here's the thing with that $1,000 tax break I gave you, I left $1,000 in your pocket. What did you do with that extra $1,000? You spent half of it and you saved half of it. So there was never this initial $1,000 of spending that happened. We missed this whole round. You just spent $500. So the multiplier effect for taxing was less. So therein lies the idea of how about I tax you $1,000 and I spend that $1,000. That is going to benefit the economy because the multiplier effect of spending is greater than the multiplying effect of taxing. All right. What's this? Was this anything? Yeah, let's skip that. Okay, automatic stabilizers. Do you all remember what automatic stabilizers are? So, when the country is in recession, the government has some automatic spending mechanisms, such as unemployment insurance, welfare insurance. So in a recession, the government automatically spends more. Now, the government is taking in less in taxes because we're in the middle of a recession, so we have a budget deficit. It's not ideal, but at least we've got some government action pushing this economy forward. When we're in expansion, all right, taxes increase because people are making more money, they pay more money, and government spending decreases because I'm paying less unemployment benefits, less welfare. And I've got a surplus, and this is great. Everybody wins. We collect a lot in taxes, we spend very little, and we got a budget surplus, and we can pay off that huge national debt that we have. The other good thing about this is it staves off potential problems with inflation. So we're taxing to keep this economy from getting out of control. People are paying a little bit more in taxes, so they're not just going crazy with so much spending, so many dollars, chasing the same number of goods, which could cause inflation to get out of control quickly. All right, automatic government stabilizers. Okay, supply side fiscal policy. So we talked about how Keynes and others said, how do we get the economy going again? How do we benefit everyone? Well, we put more money into the economy, we decrease taxes, and we get back to full employment that way. Supply side economists said, well, wait a minute. How about if instead of trying to throw government money at the problem, let's see if we can shift the supply, the aggregate supply curve, to the right. Now what happens here? Price goes down, quantity goes up. We could theoretically keep pushing this and get back to full employment. How do we do this? How do we get aggregate supply to go this way? Well, we make it easier for industry. We make it easier for businesses. We decrease regulations. We give them various subsidies. Another thing we do is we decrease taxes on income. Remember, a large component of this supply curve is income, or rather labor, all right, people working. So we talked about that idea. If I were to tax you less on the income you make, you might be inclined to work more. We also talked about the fact that that really only applies to a certain type of person who is typically making a lot of money and has a choice about whether or not they work. It doesn't apply so much to a minimum wage worker who is working as much as they could or as much as they possibly could. Although Lonnie did mention her husband, like the overtime, that factors into it. So it does factor into everyone's decision, but it tends to proportionally benefit people who make a lot of money more when you decrease personal income taxes, all in the name of shifting supply, aggregate supply to the right. And it can help the economy. And it benefits everyone. And we get into this political discussion where poor people are saying, benefits the rich people more, but the rich people are saying, well, look, you used to be homeless, now you live in a nice trailer park, what are you complaining about? So that discussion really never ends. I don't see it ending soon, but it's there, and we're now aware of the components of it, we're aware of the pros and cons of it. Supply side, shifting the aggregate supply to the right. All right, Laffer curve. Remember this one? So I talked about so this is the federal tax rate, starting at 0 all the way up to 100. This is how much tax revenue you will collect. So if your tax rate is 0, you're going to collect 0 government revenue. Your tax rate is 100%, then no one's even going to work, because why would I work if I have to pay 100% to the government? So the concept here is our tax rate might be too high. If we decrease tax rates, not only will workers want to work more, and that will spur the economy, but we will actually collect more in tax revenue. Again, theory is everybody wins. Okay, good. Any questions on that? All right. Budgetary process. So we've got a federal budget. We hope that it's a surplus. We have more money. We have to decide what to do with that. If it's a deficit, we're spending more than we're taking in. We have less money. We have to borrow that money and make that work somehow. If we continually have to borrow money, then our national debt is going to get higher and higher. Fortunately, that has been happening. I love and hate this slide. It's so funny. Every time I look at this slide, you think like, oh, there's nothing there. And then you're like, have to realize that it's this huge national debt, but they had to make it so big just to give you a scale of the U.S. national debt. So it's huge, and it's increased in an astronomically high proportion. All right, how do we control the national debt? Well, we can increase taxes. We can try to decrease spending. We can put a debt ceiling. We could try that, but we always raise the debt ceiling. All right, these three questions I think are key, and this will finish off our discussion of the chapter. Should we worry about this huge national debt? Well, can the federal government go bankrupt? Are Americans passing on debt burden to their children? And does the government borrowing crowd out private sector investment, private sector spending? Let's answer those three questions. Can we go bankrupt? Yeah, we could, theoretically, but there's no point in which we must pay off the national debt, so we can just keep kicking the can down the road further and further. So no one really worries about us going bankrupt, but it in theory could happen. Are we passing the debt burden on to our children? Yes, because we're paying interest on this debt that could be spent on schools and other things. But here's the thing. If most of the debt is internally owned, say Stephanie owns all of the debt, and she is up in Westchester, has a great school system, and we all are paying interest each year on this national debt, and she gets most of it. Her and her family and her community benefit from that, and we pay for it. So, yes, we are passing debt on to our children, but at least we're keeping it inside our own economy. But the problem with that is we're redistributing wealth to the people who are holding our debt. Crowding out effect. Do you remember the crowding out effect? All right, so this is the government needing to borrow. What the hell is the debt up to? 17 trillion? The government needs to borrow $17 trillion. So that's a demand for money. That demand increases interest rates. So when David wants to go borrow money to get his bagel shop going, he has to pay a higher interest rate. Yeah, it's true. Higher interest rate because of the $17 trillion that the American government is borrowing. But it's not a huge deal. And we say that if we're at a point where we're asking for more money, we're doing that because we're in the middle of a recession, and it's not going to hurt David as much because he's not going to be starting his bagel shop in the middle of a recession. So crowding out effect, yeah, it can hurt a little bit, but possibly not that much. Okay. It's the best sound, isn't it? It means we're through that one. All right, now we're going to go 7 and 8, which should be fresh in your minds. The Fed. All right, the Fed controls the money supply, the money system. All right, we've got money in our economy. We want enough money to handle regular transactions. We want enough money so that David can start his bagel shop if he wants to give a job to Stephanie and to get more investment going. But we don't want so much money that it becomes worthless. All right, if there's so much money, we have inflation problems, and it doesn't become worthless right away, but it goes in the direction of becoming worth less than it was. Money, medium of exchange. All right, I've got something I can exchange. I can transform my skills as a lecturer of economics into something, and I can get money for that, and then I can go get a bowl of cereal. Makes it more efficient. Unit of account. All right, I can say my lecture is worth 20 bowls of cereal. I can measure it in money. Store of value. I can give 5 lectures, and I can save those up, and I can buy a stereo. Functions of money. Money supply. M1 is currency plus checkable deposits, meaning you could go get your money out of a checkable deposit. M2 is M1 plus savings deposits, small time deposits. M1 is a little bit more liquid. So if we're thinking about how we can increase the money supply quickly, we might want to think about how we can increase M1, because that's liquid. It's a faster acting effect on the economy. The Fed, right? The Fed makes those decisions. How we're going to control the money supply to stave off inflation, and if we're in recession, how we can get more money out there so David can start that bagel shop and we can get this economy going again. All right, this is the Fed, some stuff on the Fed. I guess I would just look at the quiz questions. What did we ask on the Fed? Make sure you know that. All right, money creation. How the Federal Reserve and banks work together to influence the money supply. All right, we need to understand this required reserve ratio to really understand one of the main tools that the Fed uses. Required reserve ratio is if I put money in the bank, in Stephanie's bank, $100,000, she might be required to hold 10% of that. So she has to hold $10,000 and she can loan out $90,000 to Andres, and he can take that money and he can start his ski business. And then once he starts his ski business, he's going to put it back in the bank. 10% can be held. The rest can go out to get the economy going again. The smaller that reserve requirement is, the more money is out in the economy. So that could get the economy going, and that's great. What if that causes inflation? All right. Well, the party's over. Let's kind of slow this economy down. Let's increase the reserve requirement. Let's put it up to 20%. Decrease inflation. And there could also be problems with things are getting just a little bit too out of hand. We may have a run on the bank. We may lose faith in this whole system. So let's not be crazy. So federal government would increase reserve requirement to stave off inflation, and just maybe for safety, Federal Reserve would decrease the reserve requirement to get the economy running again. And remember this. The formula here is, so $100,000 gets deposited, required reserve at 10% at $10,000, and we have the increase in excess reserves. So it's this $90,000 that is the increase in excess reserve, and we multiply that by, where's the formula? The money multiplier. All right, so the money multiplier is 1 divided by the required reserve ratio. If required reserve ratio is 10%, 1 divided by 10% is 10. And then the formula, the increase in the actual money supply is the increase in change in initial excess reserves. Remember in our example it was 90,000 times the money multiplier. In our example was 10. So we have an increase in actual money supply, 900,000. Ah, there we go. It's right there. 100,000 in the bank, 10,000 required reserves, 90,000 initial increase. Multiply that by the money multiplier of 10. 900,000 goes into the economy to get it going again. Okay, monetary policy. They have 3 tools. Open market operations, change the discount rate, change the required reserve ratio. Open market operations, this is the buying and selling of government bonds. Remember I used the little mnemonic device. If you want to get the economy going again, I say you buy bonds. You can think of that as blowing, blow money into the economy. So I'm going to buy bonds, meaning I'm going to say, hey Stephanie, give me that bond that you're holding in your vault, and here, take $1 million in cash. All right, so I bought the bond, and now she has $1 million in cash that she can go loan out to people. If I want to slow this economy down, I want to suck money out of the economy, I sell bonds. So I'm going to say, here, Stephanie, I want you to sell you this bond. Here, take this bond, now give me $2 million in cash. All right, so I sold her a bond. Now she doesn't have $2 million in the vault. She has a piece of paper, and she's earning interest. When does she care? She's a banker. She earns interest. That's what she does. But I have sucked money out of the economy to slow it down because I want to stave off inflation. Change the discount rate. This is the rate that I, as the Fed, loan money to banks in an overnight capacity. So if Stephanie is loaning out too much money, she's a little short of her required reserves, I can give her an overnight loan. The higher that discount rate is, the less likely she's going to want to borrow money from me. And the higher that interest rate is, the more she's going to charge other banks when she loans money to them. Remember we said the discount rate is a fundamental part of it, but it's a small part of the actual money-to-money bank market. The real bigger part of that is the federal funds rate, which is the rate at which banks loan money to each other. So if Stephanie knows that she's going to have to pay a higher interest rate to borrow money from me overnight because I'm the Fed, she's going to charge you all a higher interest rate when she charges money from you or borrows money from you. So this is, I guess, two things. One, the higher interest rate you have to pay when you borrow money, the less inclined you're going to want to be to loan money to other people, so the less money there's going to be out there. And two, just literally higher interest rates. Just by increasing the discount rate, I have a literal chain reaction of increasing interest rates. And so higher interest rates mean more people want to tie their money up in the bank and less likely to spend it. All right, making sense? So open market operations, buy, sell bonds, changing the discount rate, literally changing the interest rate through that chain reaction, and the required reserve ratio. We talked about that. If I decrease that required reserve ratio, I say you only have to hold 5%. That's more money Stephanie can loan out to get the economy going. And let's see. So this, actually, David, I think you weren't here for this, but we did a little exercise, maybe you saw us do it on the video, where we worked through each of these things. Like what would you do to get the economy going, expansionary, 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 with each of these three things? What would you do to slow the economy down, to stave off inflation? Like I think you should go through that thought process as you're getting ready for the exam. Like, okay, expand, contract, how does open market operations work? How does the discount rate work? What do I want to do with the required reserve ratio? All right. We're good. Class 7. Class 8. All right. International trade. So trade is good. More trading partners. We get a trader partners who are better at making goods than we are. We make what we're good at, they make what they're good at, and we trade. Everybody wins. How do we decide what they're good at versus what we're good at? Opportunity cost. We produce what we have a comparative advantage in. All right? What we produce, whatever we have a lower opportunity cost. That means we're giving up whatever we have to give up. We produce what we have to give up the least in comparison to someone else. We looked at this example with China and the U.S. in an isolated, suppose there's only two countries in this economy, in this world. The U.S. opportunity cost of producing grain is we give up the option to produce a half a ton of steel. Compare that to Japan. If they produce grain, they give up the opportunity to produce 1 ton of steel. So I tell you what, we don't want them to give up the opportunity to produce that much steel. Let's us produce steel, or let's us produce grain, and then we'll lose out on that, but they'll produce. I said that wrong. Did I say that wrong? I don't know. Let me take a breath here. Alright. So we produce where we have the lowest opportunity cost compared to someone else. So, our opportunity cost of producing grain is a half ton of steel. Japan's opportunity cost of producing grain is 1 ton of steel. So that means we should produce grain because we have a lower opportunity cost. Now let's look at producing steel. If we produce steel, we give up the option of producing 2 tons of grain. Well, that's a lot. We're missing out on that 2 tons of grain by producing steel. If Japan produces steel, they're giving up the opportunity to produce 1 ton of grain. So they should produce steel because they have to give up less in order to do it. All right, so that's comparative advantage. If you produce what you have the lowest opportunity cost in compared to everyone else, everybody wins. And free trade, everybody wins too. There are some problems with free trade. There are some arguments against those problems with free trade. Let's go over the pros and cons. Often, politicians will say, hey, we need a tariff, we need an embargo, we need a quota. Embargo bars, law that bars trade with another company, tariff, tax on the import, quota, a limit on the amount of imports. Arguments for this protectionism, infant industry, national security, employment, cheap foreign labor. You ready to hit those four? Let's do it. Infant industry, all right, we're trying to get our industry up and running. We want one day for the U.S. to be producing good tires. Let's protect them for these initial 5 years. All right, the problem with that, when do they become a mature industry and when are they still an infant? Well, it's a little blurry, and guess what? It's an election year, so maybe we should protect them a little bit more. National security argument. So we want to be producing everything we need in the event of conflict with another country. But we stockpile pretty much everything we need anyway. And I don't know if you remember, I gave you the example that in our textbook, it said this argument was very, very valid in the War of 1812. But that was 200 years ago. So things have changed since then. But it's still an argument people will make when they don't want to lose their jobs. The employment argument. So if we import goods, all right, we're giving someone in Taiwan a job, and we want to give someone, in Pittsburgh a job, right? Because they're our neighbor, we're all paying taxes, we like people who are like us, that kind of argument. Problem is, this ignores the fact that we could pay a lower price if we bought from Taiwan. Not only could we pay a lower price, but if a company bought from Taiwan, that would be an input for them. They could get their business up and running in Pittsburgh, and they could employ more people locally in Pittsburgh. To say nothing of the fact if we start a trade war with Taiwan, it's going to hurt us too. Cheap labor argument. All right, so we cannot and should not compete with unfair lower wages in other countries. So if workers in Bangladesh don't have labor standards, they work in the minimum wage, or the going wage is very, very low compared to a U.S. worker. U.S. workers might make the argument that you should not force us to compete with those countries that have unfair labor practices. Where this argument breaks down is the U.S. worker might be more productive. So because the U.S. worker has education, the U.S. worker has access to health care, various things, it's not a fair comparison because the U.S. worker can produce just as much in 1 hour that a worker from Bangladesh can produce in 10 hours. So that is where the argument potentially breaks down. Also, another factor to consider is, well, maybe if someone in Bangladesh can produce at a lower rate, maybe that's something they have a comparative advantage in. Maybe we should just let them do it. And maybe we should produce things that we're better at. All right. Free trade, balance. Okay, good. So balance of payments. This is record keeping for foreign trade. So we have the current account and we have the capital account. The current account is the record keeping for imports and exports. The capital account is how those are funded. Key thing to remember here, pluses means money coming into an economy. In this case, it's the United States economy. So exports coming in, all right, that means we're buying stuff, or no, that means money coming in. So we're selling stuff and we have 1.5 trillion coming in, and we are at a current account deficit, which means we have less money coming in than we have going out. All right, so we have a lot of money going out to foreign countries. All right, but that money is coming back in. Remember I said this plus means these foreign countries are sending the money back, but it's not here, take the money, we want you to have it. It's we're buying assets in the United States. We're buying stocks, we're buying bonds, we're buying securities, just IOUs. We're buying real estate. And sometimes politicians will make a big deal of this and say, oh, the Chinese are buying half of our country. And it can be a little dramatic that way. It's going to take a long time for other countries to actually buy our country. But, you know, it is happening. And if it keeps happening over and over again, it could be a problem. All right. So we've got current account, we've got balance of trade, we've got capital account. All right, exchange rates. All right, how do we determine exchange rates? So, all right, check it out. Price yen per dollar. So if it costs 200 more yens for $1, we say the value of the dollar is appreciating. So more yens for $1, more valuable dollar, appreciation, stronger dollar. Fewer yens per dollar, depreciating. So the supply, as far as U.S. citizens are concerned, if their dollar is stronger, they're going to get to buy more stuff in Japan. They're going to throw more dollars at Japan. Demand for dollars. All right, if Japanese citizens have to pay fewer yen for $1, they're going to demand more dollars. All right, where supply meets demand is the equilibrium price. This is the exchange rate, 100 yen for $1. What are some things that change this equilibrium? Taste and preferences, relative incomes, relative price levels, relative interest rates. All right, so let me back up and go over those 3 or 4. All right, taste and preferences. Suppose people say, let's buy the Japanese goods. They've got the cool stuff these days. Let's buy it. So what happens in that case is we have U.S. citizens buying more Japanese goods, so this shifts to the right. All right, we've got more U.S. dollars chasing Japanese goods. Equilibrium price goes down. The dollar loses value. Yeah, that makes sense. The Japanese goods are the hot thing right now, so the dollar loses value compared to the yen. Taste and preferences could go the other way. Supply, we want less Japanese goods, so the Japanese yen decreases in value and the dollar strengthens in value. Japanese could look at it the same way too. They could say, hey, we like buying stuff in the United States now. It's the hot place to buy stuff, so they're going to increase their demand for U.S. dollars. So the dollar's going to appreciate. As this demand shifts to the right, appreciates in value, or it could be decrease. We don't like buying U.S. goods, decrease in value. Taste and preferences. We'll set a new equilibrium price. Relative incomes. Okay, so suppose incomes in the United States go up, incomes in Japan stay the same. So we've got more U.S. citizens with more dollars. Yep. Some of those dollars are going to be spent here in the United States. Some of those dollars are going to be thrown at Japanese goods. There's going to be more U.S. dollars chasing the same number of goods. This shift to the right, decrease in value. Dollar depreciates. Relative price levels. So if things are really expensive in the United States, but less expensive in Japan, U.S. citizens are going to throw more dollars at the Japanese goods because of the lower prices. More dollars being thrown at Japanese goods. All right, more supply of U.S. dollars. Equilibrium is going to go down, dollar depreciates. Relative interest rates. Okay, suppose interest rates in the U.S. get higher than Japan. Where interest rates are like 5% in the U.S., 2% in Japan. The Japanese are going to say, yeah, I'll take those U.S. dollars because I can take them and I can invest them in U.S. banks and get a higher interest rate. So like, yeah, I would love to take your U.S. dollars. Demand for U.S. dollars increases. Value, dollar appreciates, goes up. Make sense? All right, so this is the same thing. I would look at the quiz questions, make sure you understand the concepts, and any of them that require you to think this part through, make sure you're like, got it. Just exactly like we just did. Currency depreciation. Okay, there's one other little thing here with this. As the dollar appreciates in value, stronger dollar. Who benefits from that? People holding dollars, U.S. citizens. Yeah, so they gotta spend more. Who does not benefit from that? Yeah. All right, so the suppliers, the people selling things, okay, inside the United States, because you're taking your valuable dollars and you're spending them in Japan and not on U.S. products. And because the dollar is so strong, are the Japanese people, are they throwing more and more yen at the U.S. goods? They're like, no, it's going to cost me so many yen to buy that. I would rather just buy it in Japan. So as the dollar appreciates, exports decrease. So the U.S. exports more, they export more, and imports increase, meaning the U.S. citizens buy more stuff abroad. So, all right, the producers inside the country don't like that, and we had some discussion when we talked about this that maybe the Fed considers that a little bit, but I don't really think so. The U.S. doesn't really monitor that. China gets a bad rap for monitoring that, for trying to devalue their currency, because they want to depreciate their currency so they get more. So they sell more exports, and people within China import less. I think that's it. That's class 8, right? All right, we made it through. You're welcome to watch the video again if you like, but hopefully you got what you needed out.